Hello, everybody, and welcome to this topic: the climate balance goes green. The role and responsibility of the construction industry to reduce its emissions. There is no doubt we have to break the barriers in the construction of sustainable and climate-friendly buildings of the future. The future of construction must be sustainable. But how, and how will we build in the future? What type of materials and what is the role of architecture in the change towards a sustainable construction of the future? And most important, how do we accelerate the needed change? Well, first of all, the changes in the construction industry are obvious. Our built environments is responsible for 40% of global carbon emissions. And during the global transition to a net zero, the industry needs to radically reduce the amount of carbon emitted from new construction, infrastructure, and buildings, while the industry is, at the same time, is expected to grow by 42% by 2030. Driven largely by the demand of residential construction. But the good news is that we know many of the solutions already, and something can be done about it. Today, we will examine how we can start transforming words, knowledge, and technical solutions into action. With inspiration from this nice transformation panel, we will discuss the barriers and levers in the Nordic region that can spark cultural change and drive the necessary shift towards a sustainable future. I'm here as a part of the Nordic Council of Ministers program called Nordic Sustainable Construction. And we are a group called the Sustain Nordic project, where we are focusing on how can we change the building materials and the architecture for the futures. And this is why we invite to this discussion how we will build a sustainable future. We will not today define sustainability. That's very important because it's very difficult to define. But we will focus on which solutions that do least harm and how we can get in sync with the balance of the planet, as everybody is speaking about. My name is Nikolaj Svejstrup, and I'm an associate partner in Sustain Nordic. And we have a very broad project where we also look closer at the LCA, the circular construction, and not least the emissions from construction sites who's led here from Iceland. So we're very pleased to be here. As you can hear, I come from Denmark. So we have invited this transformation panel. Arnhildur Palmadottir is the architect. Siri, or Sigurdur? Sigurdur? Yeah, I'm not all in. I've only been here for 2 days. I'm not all into Icelandic yet. But you are the director of sustainability at Hornstein. And then Hulda Hallgrímsdóttir, who's a project manager and economic lead in urban development, or yeah, at the city. At the city, yeah. So I'm very pleased to welcome you. Shall we give them a hand? So I've prepared some questions for you. Arnhildur, you're the architect, and as an architect, you per definition have to think in the long term when you make houses and buildings. So how do your way of thinking separate you from other architects and the way developers are thinking?
So maybe the obvious way of new thinking is maybe to think of existing buildings as like bank of building materials that we use, and we have to take care of it, and we cannot demolish it and get rid of it in a linear way. So that's something that we should all be thinking about, and also that if you're going to do new buildings, we do have to think of them as circular, so we can use the building materials again and again and again. And because it's resources that have emitted carbon already. And I think also this thought about buildings being castles or something that have to last for 100 years is also a little bit difficult thinking, because we need to somehow use, we use it often as an excuse to emit more, because we emit actually from when we make the building, and it doesn't divide evenly over all the years. But personally, I have two methods of maybe approaching architecture, and one of them is to work inside the boundary of the regulations with the client. And I try to push that with the reuse of building materials, to life cycle assess building design while I'm designing the buildings, because that actually takes the choice out of my hand of what kind of materials I want to use, because I have to use materials that maybe I wouldn't choose if I wouldn't the life cycle assess them before that. And then also and that I can do with, of course, the client in an easy way, but pushing the boundaries maybe for regulations and certifications. But then also I do try to pull it from the outside by doing speculative projects where we imagine new narratives and stories of maybe a new world, where we can actually use building materials that are not connected to like profit maximization of the building industry today. So I like to do these two things, to work inside the system, trying to push it with reuse of materials, developing those ideas, and then from the outside by pulling the industry in a way.
Do you have some examples of these stories about the new ways of thinking?
Yeah, we are actually work on that with my son, who is doing his master's in architecture now, and we've done a project called lava forming, where we use building material that comes from the ground, actually just flowing up from the mantle of the earth. So it's earth producing its own building materials, and we're actually looking at that in that way, that if it's our material coming up from the ground, how would we maybe shape it into a building material? We can do that in many ways. So
it must take some time, but it's just,
it could be.
I saw some of your imaginations. It look very, very beautiful with the lava going into these holes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But inside the system, of course, I work with Linnea now from Denmark, who is an accelerator in this change maker, and I think that's really important also to not invent ideas and invent the wheel. We have to just maybe use approaches that have been done elsewhere, and we can maybe adjust them to our specific conditions. Like in Iceland, we have earthquakes, and that are more we have to think about when we design. So yeah, I like to juggle those two ways of approaching architecture, and I think that's quite specific. But I think we should do it. All designers should do that. They should imagine something, and then we can pull the industry a little bit.
But there must also be a bit different for I know Linnea is a Danish company, and he got a lot of stuff that could be recycled. It must be a bit different up here. I mean, you have the stuff you have. And
at the moment, I'm actually I'm like getting so much requests of checking out buildings that are going to be demolished. So that doesn't seem to be a problem at the moment. And I think we have to be really, like I mentioned in the beginning, I think it's so important that we start thinking about buildings like that we do not demolish them. They are banks of materials, and we can see that in the crisis now in Ukraine and the COVID crisis, that now we don't have building materials. We have to import them, and it takes 1 year to get them. But instead, we have buildings, and if we need to change them and dismantle, we should use them.
We have this word of saying that's called urban mining. So you do the mining inside the city. Yeah, very interesting. Siri, what is the important of the construction sector in terms of sustainability seen from you?
I mean, I guess I moved to Iceland 2018, something like that, and went into sustainability consulting. And it was interesting because you talk about these numbers of 40% of carbon emissions are tied to the construction industry, 40% of resource use. This is the construction industry. In Iceland, we actually had no documentation of what this was. We are an import nation, so when we look at our climate budget, we're only looking at what is emitted in Iceland. So if you look at the construction industry there, you essentially have just the emissions from the construction vehicles or from the machinery. So it's only 3% of Iceland's climate
No
budget.
problem here.
It's no problem. That's the issue.
Yeah.
So 2018, that's where we're at. We have no idea. This is this thing we just brush. It's uncomfortable. We don't like to talk about it. We have all this beautiful green energy, so we don't have to worry about that. But we have no idea what we're taking in, what we're using. Absolutely blank slate. And then you start pointing to this 40%, and everybody says, well, the 40% is because everybody's using coal. It's all of this, blah, 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 blah. So it must be so much more less in Iceland. Still, we have no idea what it is. So last year, this year. Jesus. 2022, March, we finally released the first assessment of the carbon emissions from the construction sector in Iceland. And I can't tell you percentage-wise, we're not close to 40%. So, I mean, we're not that high. But here we're seeing an extra huge emissions. I can't remember the number. I think it's 360,000 tons of CO2 emitted from the construction industry per year. That's a lot that we're adding on to ourselves personally, since there's only 360,000 people in Iceland. So that's, you're adding 1 to the 13 tons I think we all emit every year, which is huge. And then you start looking at the breakdown here. Where are we at then? Now we can start talking percentages. 45% of this added emission, this is building materials. This is how we choose to build our buildings. Energy sector is a little bit different. That's about 30% of that whole number. We should definitely make some changes there, but it's definitely these building materials, how we choose how we build our buildings. That's how we're going to affect change. This is what Arnhildur is talking about with the circular economy, concrete industry. I mean, if we are realistic, we're not moving to CLT 100% in the next 15, 20, 30 years, and I can probably debate that with somebody from the timber industry. But I mean, Iceland's a concrete nation. We need to find solutions for our concrete, and that's what I'm trying to do. We're trying to get get the concrete to carbon neutral by 2030. We're looking into all these ways of either recycling old concrete, working with Arnhildur, and trying to see how we can actually push down the carbon emissions or the carbon footprint of concrete. But we are dealing with earthquakes. We're dealing with a lot of humidity. We need to deal with building materials that we know and understand so that we can ensure quality. At the end of the day, sustainability is a quality issue. Are you building buildings that last? So, I mean, I went all over the place.
Are you doing that here in Iceland? Are you building buildings that last?
I mean, if you look at the building stock, I mean, all of our buildings, they're old. I mean, this is a lot of old concrete buildings that we do need to kind of figure out ways to, I guess, design them to reuse them. But I mean, we've got mold issues. But again, I would probably throw this more to, we have a regulation issue. We have a lack of responsibility issue. We don't have a clear responsibility. There's no clear responsibility when you close a building who actually bears the brunt of any sort of leakage and whatnot. And that's an issue, That's actually the point that I lost about the 100-year thing about buildings, because they never last 100 years. We are always changing them. Right. We are always taking something apart, and so we have to think about it more as something that can take apart.
A lot of people are talking about this modular system.
I mean,
but that's also that's also one of the issues in our project is this LCA, because we're talking a lot about it. We have the legislation now in Denmark from the 2023. Everything should be marked of what is the LCA, and then of course when you import stuff, you can begin looking of what is the actually the life cycles analysis of these things that you use.
We're still far ways away from actually having the requirement of an LCA in Iceland. I mean, there's only been completed 10 LCAs on Icelandic buildings to date.
Okay.
I mean, and this is, I know, rapidly changing because of Reykjavík, and there's a lot of stuff going on. But I mean, we're still pretty far off from seeing any sort of changes within our building regulation that's going to either have a requirement on LCAs. You know, maybe 8 years down the line, we'll have a requirement on a reduction in the carbon. But this is something we need to push, and that needs to come both above, and we also need to call from below. We need to get more people involved.
But are they the people who are the dwellers, the people who wants to build? Are they asking for? In Denmark, it's very popular to use some different marks, the DGNB, the Nordic Swan, the Bream. Are people asking for that?
They are, but there's actually, as right now, I mean, there's only one municipality, Reykjavík is not there yet, that's actually giving any sort of incentive to going through a certification scheme. And then Arnaldur and I, we will definitely advocate the fact that these certification schemes aren't probably what's going to push us as far as we want to go in terms of carbon emissions and you know, things like that. But they definitely do take us in the right direction. Yeah. But there's no incentive, and it is an extra cost. So even if you want to go that way, it just costs more.
Often don't lower the CO2 emission from the embodied CO2, so that's a problem. And so that's actually what...
We have the same discussion in Denmark, Sweden, and so on. So it's not, but I think we're just one step ahead because our big foundations, pension foundations, they really request these things. So it's moving fast, and then we have this between all the people who's building this, they have this agreement that okay, we can try this before it gets to legislation, and now we'll get to you. Because Hulda, how do you think the municipality and the administration can promote and accelerate these things that we're talking about? There was a lot of issues here pointing your way, but what are you doing to accelerate the green transition?
I think it's the responsibility is a super big part of it. I think policy making, like strong policy making, is key to have some clear goals that then under policies can measure themselves against, that the city knows where it's going at, and the people that are working at the city are all working towards the same in the same direction. Because of course a city is a big machine. It's full of silos, or has been, and we need some projects that kind of go, and sustainability and projects in this direction demands that we are working between the silos in the city. So something like Reykjavík Green Deal is, we are starting, it's still, we are taking baby steps. It started as a 10-year investment plan for the city post-COVID, but it's kind of transforming into a city policy. So we are creating this guiding light, you could say, that other policies within the city then need to adjust themselves to. And if we're not within, different departments in the city answering some of the main goals that the city have, then we might have a problem. Why are we working on this? Shouldn't be we working on that? And I think that's it's a huge task to work on this. But I think this is one of the things we need to do. But something like the Reykjavík Green Deal has, we've put some goals, and for instance, this project has come out of that's called Green Housing of the Future, that you guys know. You were part of the teams, one of the teams that won, but the city, the politicians, they say we should go out with some sites where we are actually, we are asking teams to bid on, so it's land that the city is going to sell or make contracts on, and the teams are bidding on these sites, and the city will give discounts on the sites compared to normal pricing. So we're asking them to come up with innovative green projects that are cutting emissions compared to, the normal buildings, even though the benchmark is a little up in the air, but at least ambitious green projects. And then the teams or the developers are getting a discount, and of course the city is expecting that this discount is going into the development of the green projects. So that is kind of the city trying to push the industry, taking some part of the responsibility, but not only that, pushing the industry to start talking about this, but also at the same time we are learning a lot. And now we've done the 1.0, but the plan is to do another round, and we will definitely do it in a totally different way, because there are a lot of things that we learn when you do things. It's super complicated to go from you're asking something, and we were quite ambitious, asking for both, it was sustainable buildings the whole way around, also regarding, BREEAM and all these kind of things, emissions, LCA,
energy use,
everything. People or the teams could, the construction, like they should answer if they were gonna, planning on doing something within all these aspects. But then, when it then comes to the contract part, of course, that the city needs to make a contract, making sure that actually these teams will do what they said they would.
Right.
And that's of course, a learning, a negotiation and a learning curve how to do this. But it's an important. There is a lot of things happening, and the city really wants to move in this direction.
So what we're here for is we're already talking a lot about it, but this is our biggest question from the project that I'm representing here, the Sustain Nordic, is how is the drive, innovation and development power of all actors stimulated to take responsibility for the necessary development of material choices and future architecture? So you're into it, but how can we accelerate? There's a lot of good examples, but if we really gonna make this change, how can we accelerate it?
I think it's a balance between the stick and the carrot.
Yeah.
You need, there need to be some regulations. We all know what needs to be done, but of course, it's kind of like you said before. It needs to work from both ends.
Down, yeah.
And I've actually thought about, after moving here, I lived in Denmark for 15 years, that I think in Copenhagen that there was like a decade of educating people, of knowing what is good plan, what is a city, having, this is of course a democracy festival, like how am I involved in the development of my city? You can be developed, you have a saying, it's not only the architects or people working at the city hall that are, it's a city for the people. So how do we educate the people to know what quality? I think quality is a huge part of the discussion of sustainability. We have to make quality. What is quality? Quality of, our buildings, our urban spaces, and everything. And I think we are definitely behind, and there is also maybe a lack of funding both for that kind of things and also for the development in the sector.
I think we need to change how we see architecture. Like I mentioned the castle before, that we always imagine these buildings being kind of, they have a typical style in architecture, but we need to think about them in a new way. We need to think about them maybe looking different. We need to think about them being composed of different things, and that has to do with how people perceive what is a building, how should a building be, and I think we need to change that now, really quickly, and I
think we agree a lot of that, but do you have any ideas or dreams of how to do that, how to accelerate this?
We're actually taking part in some projects, me and Siri together, and
a lot of projects actually,
a lot of projects somehow. And as Hilda mentioned, I mean, I think we have to have room for trial and error. We have to have room for all quickly testing stuff. Okay, this doesn't work, we have to do it again. And it has to be funded by everyone, because it's everyone's, it has to be the government, it has to be the funds, the contractors, everyone, somehow funding this, because it cannot be only the contractors or the developers, it cannot be only us as architects and designers trying to use time to find solutions, or the city. It has to be somehow a collaborative thing, and it has to be connected to the universities, and we have to be continuously escalating these kind of research. We cannot use 10, 20 years to find out if this works. We have to just do it in real projects, and we're actually doing a mini version of it now you're doing it in your contracts. We're doing it in many projects now. We're just, but it maybe the cost is mostly on us, so I think we can, by doing that somehow, dividing the cost. I mean, everyone benefits. It's the earth, so I guess
it's a time issue too. I mean, I think you need to get everybody to the table right away. I mean, we're working in projects where we've got now architects, engineers, we've got now producers from building materials on board. We've got the developers themselves. Everybody's very aware of what the goal is. I mean, you need to be there. Everybody needs to know that we're working towards whatever it is, and be on board to make that happen. And that's what we kind of tend to see a lot of, especially on the engineering side, is, you know, you've got an engineer over there. He has no idea what the actual goal, what the actual purpose is. He just wants to do things like they were yesterday, because then he can go home a little bit faster. So it's also this, this time, but this is a cost.
They want
to
use it.
And I think also there, you know, here in Iceland, like in many, I know it's also in Copenhagen, that we need a lot of new apartments like tomorrow. And it's like it's a constant fight against time, and this doesn't fit into that fast running game.
You do a lot of try and error, but in the wrong way, or
exactly. So
I think so.
The speed is.
We have to
imagine it's a kind of problem with materials and so on. It's going too fast, or
like you would maybe say, we need to flýta okkur hægt. How do you say that?
We have to
I don't know.
Speed up,
move fast, slowly.
move fast, slowly.
Do fast, slow.
Well, we hear a lot of how to involve the people. Is there anyone having a question for the panel here? You must raise your hand, or it's no, and you can also do this in Icelandic. Then I can get the translation afterwards. Yeah.
Astrid from Green Building Council. It's a bit of a technical question. Oh, sorry. Yeah, a technical question about the concrete, which is, well, we like concrete in Iceland, and we want to use it on. So how can you make it carbon neutral?
Good question. Good question.
And will it cost a lot? So
I mean, how? So if we look at what Hotstein and this is an 8-year goal, something like that. So there's a lot of different things that pull into it, a lot of different projects that are pulling into it. Hotstein is owned by Heidelberg, which is they're doing a lot of carbon capture, which is going to be a huge part of that solution. But I think for me personally, it's more a question of what we put into the concrete. We have the potential to really reduce the amount of cement we use every day in how we design. And this is really a question of, again, we're talking about time. Any good, competent engineer knows that there's you choose a sort of concrete that's outside and weathered and is getting beaten by the salts and the wind and the rain in Iceland, and then there's another type of concrete you choose for your insides where it's weather protected. We're seeing a lot more buildings now being insulated from the outside, which means not a lot of concrete is being exposed to the elements. So we do have this potential right there to choose concrete that is a little bit less, has a little bit less cement. But do we do it? No, I mean, because it takes time. Again, if something changes on the concrete, on the construction site, and your or your contractor, I should say, wants to go quicker, he'll call in again and say, oh, I want that C35 because that's the outside with a lot of that cement, and I know I can get everything done quickly. So, yeah, I'm not really answering your question. I'm just talking about all the problems. Do I see it happening in the next 8 years? Definitely. Do I know how? Not really. I have an idea of a few of the solutions. We're going to see a lot of different secondary cementous materials, even maybe coming from Iceland, that will replace a lot of the cement that we're actually using today. We're going to see a lot of more recycling of aggregates, recycling of old concrete. We're going to see all of these things are going to pull together, and we're going to get there. But yeah. I'm a very optimistic person.
She just started her job.
Yeah, I just started a month ago.
She's still optimistic.
So, I'm very optimistic. I'm very optimistic. But yeah, if I have another job in 2 years, then maybe it didn't happen. No. Yeah, it's just a lot of different things.
Anyone else wants to ask a question? Or just raise your hand. We have some time left. Well, we have this discussion. What if we don't have to use this concrete? We have a lot of discussions in the other Nordic countries. Of course, we have a lot of trees and materials, seaweed. Some of the things you have here also here.
We have no trees.
No, I don't. But maybe something else in the. But do you have a discussion or what is? Can you think of other ways of using materials here?
There are some experiments going on with hemp.
Yeah,
Is that hemp?
but that's an insulation material, so you don't have to use that.
Yeah.
So there are like.
Yeah, we have also talked a lot about this because we have. It's like we are a country of stones, and if we can find ways to not do the cement part,
Right.
it's actually quite sustainable. It's actually very sustainable to use rocks just to carve them out to. So that's actually quite interesting for us, but it's always the cement, this tiny part that's actually doing the 80% of the 90 of the CO2 footprint. So concrete maybe is not that, and we will have to use it. So even in the future for structures, for bridges, for foundations for buildings.
But is there another way, your lava project?
Yeah,
I think it's
okay.
very interesting.
That would solve it all.
But still, you have to wait for the eruption and do the right place. But I mean, isn't there a way to speed the process or do that? In different ways. I mean, you're cutting out the stones.
I have three ways.
But we have done that for centuries
that's done already. There are like many options to do that with the lava. For example, crazy ideas like digging down. They are doing this testing with supercritical fluid, which is a geothermal energy capture. They're doing that in the north, and they dig down almost to magma and use the gases when they're between like gas and water, so it moves, the molecules move really quickly. That would solve our energy crisis, the world's energy crisis. And then we can also, why not just put in, fetch the lava then, if we're almost down to the lava, and just bring it up. It would actually go up with 2-ton pressure, I think, like heavy. And then we could 3D print from it.
Volcano.
That's one way of doing it.
Why not?
I have other options.
We're really looking for innovation in this project, but now I'm really excited.
We're not talking about timber like you do.
No, we just make our own volcano. That's great.
I don't think I'm going to tell you about the other options with the lava, but there are many.
Yeah.
But timber in Iceland is probably never going to be an option. And
not yet. Anyway.
No.
We import it, but we have problems with moisture. We have problems with. Siri knows much more about that, but that's like something we have to with the CLT also. It comes from. It doesn't always come from sources that we can be 100% sure is climate friendly. Yeah. So I think there's going to be a lot of discussion about this, but I don't think there's an obvious option in Iceland other than stones, maybe.
But I think it's just going to be this hybrid of all these things. I mean, I think as soon as we get more money in, we've got Askur, all these.
Funds,
foundations, I mean, when we get more people involved, looking at Hampstead, I mean, they're doing a cool house there on Bolungarvík on the west coast. There's one house where they're doing rammed earth. I mean, people are trying a lot of different things, and I think it's just going to be this trial and error. Who's willing to take that risk?
And I think that funding needs to go.
Right?
It needs to be multiplied by I don't know how much, but 10, a lot. Yeah, exactly. 10. At least.
We actually have the perfect circular house, which we have often mentioned. We have the turf house because that's actually made of Icelandic materials. A lot of stones, a little bit of wood, and then turf. And that's the materials we have in Iceland. And maybe we should continue to look into that a little bit better.
And maybe it's also to accelerate, but then also. The other big issue is of course how to protect the nature. Right. So a lot of the wetlands, if you use them for this, then we have another problem.
That's why we have to calculate everything we do and look at the numbers and be sure that.
I was just I've been here some days and I was visiting this big project, the Mammoth, where we put the CO2 into the ground and make it into stone. What's the slogan? CO2 to stone. Could that be an acceleration? Now it should very far down and then it turns into stone and very deep. But could we do that on the ground? Do you think that?
My problem with that is that we are not slowing down.
Yeah.
We are not changing. It's really amazing what they're doing down in the ground, but they're actually just allowing companies to continue to emit CO2
Okay.
if they capture it and move it to Iceland to put it down into the ground. So that's my problem with carbon capture projects, but hopefully they will get so inexpensive that it can save the planet. But I don't think we should also...
It should be both.
It should be both,
Need to be both.
It needs to be both, yeah.
Okay, great. If you should end this talk with one short sentence of what could maybe that's the most but the most difficult thing to do.
I don't talk in short sentences.
No. But what if you should go home today and say, okay, now I'm only going to do things that do good. What should you change? What would you go home and do different to tomorrow in each of your positions? Wow, there I got them, huh?
We're all doing everything right.
Yeah. And I'm doing everything all the time too. Yeah.
I think I would continue with my speculative projects, but they seem to have much. They have like gained interest. They spark other ideas. People have come to me after I published the idea. I've gotten really nice ideas to further that and continue with that project. So it's gonna more like an interdisciplinary thing where technology, science meets design and architecture. So I think that's gonna save the world.
Maybe that's also part of the spectrum, because that's kind of pushing to something. It's starting discussions. It sparks something. So that maybe communicating more, getting more, getting the people involved in general. It's maybe on a democratic note that we need to be better at communicating this as something we all need to work on.
And then nothing about me, but I used to teach at the university, and maybe just a kind of hope. The students at the University of Iceland Engineering Department are just absolutely full of hope, full of ideas. They want to do so much more. They ask us to do so much more, and they want to be a part of the solution. So, I mean, even though we don't have all the answers here, I know that, in the next 10 years or so, we'll see engineers, architects,
Oh my God.
Economists.
Economists.
That sustainability and this way of thinking, this life cycle way of thinking is just so ingrained in them that it becomes just this part of how they work and how they kind of interact with one another. And that brings me a lot of hope, even though I'm very optimistic. But it's good to know that I think we're in pretty good hands with the next generation, like your son and all these people.
I think I really enjoy this kind of, when I work with people from other fields, and then I think something sparks when you work with biologists, economists, engineers, so then something happens. So that's so important, and I think that's the future. That definitely needs to be more.
So we got a push from the future.
Push.
I think that's a very
pull
good.
From the future.
Towards and from the future.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for participating here. Shall we give them a big hand? That was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.